And I want to start this morning by sharing with you my last 12 hours. Can I do that? So my last 12 hours, it's actually not my last 12 hours, and I don't usually do this because I don't necessarily share my process when God changes things on me, but I can tell you that I've been up since 2 o'clock this morning. And the only reason I want to share this morning is I actually have been planning all week on this amazing graduation service for these guys, and I thought I did a pretty good job. Just kidding. But I did work on a message that I thought that we were supposed to bring for these guys to inspire them and encourage them and be able to take on the world. And you guys are going to do great things. And you are. You're going to do all those things. And you're going to be amazing. If you let yourself be amazing. But at 2 o'clock this morning, God woke me up, and it was an argument for the first 30 minutes. God, I'm sleeping. I got to preach tomorrow. God, I'm sleeping. And I don't know about how you guys talk with God, but sometimes it is, hey, God, you could have told me this Wednesday. And I would have tried to listen, but obviously I wouldn't have. Or he would have told me Wednesday. I never know why God changes things. I only know that when he does, if I don't listen, that I'll be in trouble. I never know why God does what he does. I only know that when he does, if I'm not ready to act, I will miss what he's wanting to accomplish. So this morning at 2 o'clock for the first 30 minutes really was me tossing in bed, rolling around. If you guys be praying for us, he's starting to feel better. I just got a text before I came up here. But Josiah's not been feeling good for 2 days. It just hit him yesterday. That's why you guys didn't see Pastor Marcy up here. Everybody knows how that goes, right? Sick child. We're not going to get him out. We're pretty sure it's an ear infection. But even then, if you guys would be praying, and she sent me a text earlier and said, hey, by the way, his fever's coming down, which is awesome. That's what we wanted. And so, but it's been one of those moments where there was this sick child and there's been all this stuff going on. And at 2 o'clock this morning, obviously that was when I could hear the best because God woke me up. And for 30 minutes, I tossed and turned. And with him being sick, he's in our room. And so I decided, you know what? I'm probably going to wake somebody up. Why don't I just go ahead, lay down my pride, get out of bed, and say, God, what do you want to talk about? So at 2:30, I get up. And at 2:30, he completely changes what I want to talk about this morning. And normally I come up and I really like to do these just encouraging. And this isn't encouraging if you know how to listen. It's extremely encouraging. But what I'm about to present to you is going to remind you that you do have a choice. You have to choose to be amazing, and you choose to be amazing by allowing God to do what God does. But so many people choose to not allow God to move. And then we want to complain about why God is not moving, but we've handcuffed him by our actions or by our lack of knowledge. And so this morning I want to talk a couple stories we know. I'm going to kind of jump right into it. Hey, they ain't even start my clock. I got all kind of time today. I love it. Y'all are in trouble now. I'm just kidding. I would like to say how awesome Pastor Roslyn, I heard all about it last week. Pastor Roslyn did an amazing job, brought the word, fantastic thing. And then also we had Cheryl Salem here the week before. God is doing some great things. And when I started really paying attention to what he was telling me at 2:30, I could see where God was building something great. See, something they don't tell you, that when you step into a role like I had to step into over the last couple years in my life, it started at a church in Birmingham, and then God transitioned me here as well. And when you step into a role, there are things it's like a power source you plug into with God that he opens up that you never knew you had inside of you. You start to see visions you never thought you could see. You see things about people that you never thought you would understand. You understand the word at a deeper level than you never thought possible. And I don't think it's a pastoral thing. I think it's a role that he needs you to play for a moment. So when he needs you to be in that position, he puts you and equips you for what you need. And I was reading through, and I'm passing through scriptures, and y'all know my brain works really weird, and I see little things that some people don't see because we skip on the big stuff, and I like the little stuff, and that's just how my brain works. But as I'm reading and I'm processing and I'm working on what I think God wants us to talk about, the title comes to me first. And before I share my title for this message, I want to talk about what I saw when we were worshiping. Because what I saw when we were worshiping is two or three different groups. And it began to unravel or unveil to me why God changed my message. You see, there's a group here that you're going through something and you're worshiping your way out. There's a group here that's going through something and you don't see your way out. And there's a group here that is going through something that's just crying out. And I began to see it during worship. It was the craziest, and I love it when God does this. Because it's like this connection where it's almost like confirmation. He just says, I told you, now do what I asked you to do. Because I get real nervous when I come up here and I get kind of like stern. I don't want to say stern. I just get kind of like more in your face, right? I get nervous about that. I just do. It's not my personality, and so I'm always afraid, God, am I going to say something wrong? I'm not nervous about you guys. I love y'all, and you guys can complain all you want to, but I don't answer to you. I answer to God. And I'm just being honest, y'all have never complained, so I love y'all. Y'all are awesome. Y'all have allowed God to work through me in any way I needed or he needed, and y'all have never one time called me or sent me an email. Now, the last church I was at, we won't go there, but I'm just saying, I'm just kidding. You guys are awesome. But I began to listen to the stories, and I began to listen to what God was saying, and as I'm watching you worship, the one common factor is you're all going through something. Some of you know how to get out. Some of you don't know how to get out. Some of you haven't figured out you need to get out. And so in the process, I start praying this morning, and I will take a nap after service, just so you guys know. And it's going to be the best sleep I've had in a long time. I'm already speaking that out. My son's going to be better. I'm not going to have to worry about him. I'm going to sleep. But before we get there, we got to do something in this room this morning or online, because I believe there's several of you online today watching that God wants to speak to you as well. And I want to start with a very simple story. Some of these stories I'm going to set them up and read a couple of scriptures out. The other, I will probably read a little more scripture in it just because it's not as well known. But the first story I want to start with, which is one of my favorites, is David and Goliath. I love this story. I love this story because you can create 1,000, come on preachers, y'all are in the house, you could write 1,000 messages out of this one story. I bet if I really tried, which I won't, but I could be tempted, I could do an entire year of sermons on just David and Goliath and make it something you've never heard every Sunday. It's that good of a story. It's that full of nuggets. It's that full of little things, and I love that. But I want to look at one character in the story of David and Goliath. But before we get to him, I want to tell you my title. You see, this morning God woke me up at 2:30, and at 2:30 this morning, he said, today you're talking about opposition creates reposition. Opposition creates reposition. Goliath was an opposition. Most of us should know, just in case we don't, David and Goliath, here's David, shepherd boy, here's Goliath, monster giant, shows up on the field bringing bread like his dad asked him to. And when he shows up, something inside of him just snaps because everyone else is afraid, and he doesn't understand why people are not having the faith in God to know that God will move. Therefore, he steps up and says, well, I'll go take care of this guy. I'm the youngest one out here, but I'm going to take care of this. Not me, but the God that's in me. So we all know the story. He goes out, and after David goes out, he kills Goliath. He cuts off his head. Whole nother message right there if you're wondering. Don't just knock your giants down, kill them. Cut the head off. Take off every knowledge they got, anything they got. But before that, there's a character that I want to go back to and read about. Because anytime that God leads you to do something good, whoa, if I don't break this, that would be terrible. Since that works out good. There we go. Pastor Lonzo's a little bigger than I am. I had to bring this back down to me. Anytime God leads you to do something good or meaningful or something that's going to impact change, the one thing you can guarantee is opposition. You can guarantee the enemy's not going to just lay down. You can guarantee that you're going to have to work. And you can guarantee that you're going to be put in a position that if you're trying to do what God called you to do, there will be a moment that if you don't allow God to take over, you can't accomplish it. Because God will never ask you to do something you can do on your own. Anytime God moves, anytime God starts to move, anytime God starts to do something new, anytime God starts to bring in back the old, anytime he does something major, he has a voice, but that voice reaches a point to where they cannot carry it by themselves. Anytime God moves, it's always God gets the credit because it's so big, one person or one church or one team, or you cannot do it without the supernatural power of God. And in that process, that opposition, when you have to face it, if you don't allow God to move, the opposition will take you over. But if you allow God in the opposition, if I realize that there's my Goliath and I am David and I have a God who's bigger than anything else in this world, my God is greater and he is bigger. And if I allow God to take over and say, God, I know I can't do this on my own, but when I stand with you, anything is possible, then you will kill the giant. But you see, in the process of killing the giant, so many people stop there like, man, that was a great story. That was only the beginning of his story. You see, his opposition created a reposition because the moment he killed Goliath, Saul said, you're going to stay with me in my kingdom, which took David from being over the sheep to living in the castle. Now, don't miss this. Don't miss this because you're wondering why you're having to take care of sheep. You're still wondering why you smell like sheep. And what's happening is God's trying to put the opposition. Sometimes we blame the devil, right? Like the devil is there. And can I be honest? It might be the devil, but God's going to use what the devil's trying to use for your bad and turn it into your good. He's always working for your good. Therefore, he's got a plan. Our problem is we hit the wall in the opposition and we want to cower down instead of standing up, realizing God's trying to do something. Whether the enemy is fighting you, you're fighting you, or someone else is fighting you. In the opposition, God has already started creating your reposition. And when you allow God to move, what you do through that opposition, as you move, they see God. There's something that sparks, and when it sparks, somebody's like, hey, I need to know what you've got. So you're going to come live in my kingdom. And we all know how that story goes. It's a whole other message. He then gets jealous, and God's with David, and David's killing all these people. And that's not what we're here to talk about today. But everybody had an opposition. If I go through the Bible, Moses had Pharaoh, Adam and Eve had a serpent, David had Goliath, Jesus had King Herod, the Pharisees, Judas, he had everybody, right? Judas, everybody. Batman had the Joker, and Nehemiah had Sanballat and Tobiah. You know I can't be all serious, right? Y'all know that's not going to happen. But in the opposition of every story, did you realize had Pharaoh not chased Moses, Moses would have never split the sea. He wouldn't have had to. So in the process of Pharaoh chasing Moses, yeah, everybody's scared and everybody's complaining and everybody's like, we got to go back. He's going to kill us all. It forced them into a corner where Moses said, God, you got to move. And when he said, God, you got to move, God said, just stretch out your rod. I'm already moving. And the moment he stretches out his rod, it's the sea parts and they walk across. Now, I pray we don't become like them and get so confused that God does so many miracles for us that we still have to walk for 40 years until we get to where we're supposed to be. But even then, it took 40 years. Their opposition created reposition. They went from being slaves to owning the land. Their opposition created reposition. As they moved forward, I want to talk about 1 Samuel 17, 28 through 29. Back to my friend David. And David's oldest brother heard him speaking with the men. At this point, David showed up. He's about to go fight Goliath. He's inquiring. He's not about to fight Goliath. He's inquiring what's going on. I can imagine what he's really doing is looking at these guys saying, why are y'all sitting here? Why are you afraid? He's kind of creating a little stir. And David's oldest brother heard him speaking with the men, and he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? With whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch this battle. Now, what have I done, said David? Can I even speak? And I love this part, so don't miss what he does, right? Because how many people have gotten into arguments with their family? Anybody? If you don't raise your hand, you are just flat out lying, right? Y'all know where that goes. That leads to. I get it. We're gonna be like, oh, I ain't cool. We got cool family, man. We don't lie to each other. We don't talk. We don't argue, right? I know better. Family's family. That's what makes it great. You can argue, and then your family love brings you back, and it makes each other stronger. It's great. It teaches us humility, for sure. It teaches us to live with those that we don't always agree with, for sure. So here's his brother, and I know how this would have been at my house. If I would have been angry and I'd have said something to him, and then my brother would have looked at me and said, what is your problem? Can't I even speak? It wouldn't have stopped right there. It would have been an immediate, let's just finish this right now. Let's just argue this out, right? It's like someone bringing up politics at the holidays. It's just never going to end well, but you're going to finish the conversation to decide who gets to be the last word. How many people in the house here, you're the last word? How many people would say their siblings the last word? Yeah, you're lying too, right? I'm just kidding, y'all. I get it, right? I got to have the last word, so I'll say it, then you say it, then you say it. Your marriages don't work this way, though, right? I'm helping some of y'all out if you're listening. So here's his brother who's all angry at him, wants to know why he's even there. My favorite part is David says, can I even speak? And it says he turned, as in what you're trying to do right now has nothing to do with what God wants to do right now. Therefore, I don't have time to interfere or even entertain what you want to talk about. Because God has put me on a mission. God has sent me here for a reason. Therefore, I would love to have this argument with you. But right now, at this moment, I've got something I'm supposed to do for God. So he turned and began to talk again. He wasn't talking just to find out. He had already heard all the stories as he walked through camp. He's talking to stir their faith. Why are you afraid? He's a Philistine. I serve a God who's bigger. Can you imagine what that's like for David, knowing that he says, I killed a lion, I killed a bear, look at me. You're already talking about how young I am and my stature, but God moved in me. I see your opposition, but can I tell you that when you connect with God, all it takes is a stone and he's going to knock it down. What I love about some of the stories that you read, the people never even had to show up. God moved before they got there, but he needed their faith to move so he could. The moment they decided he's God and I'm going to connect with him, he moved. He didn't wait on them to get there. He just moved so when they got there, it was done. The giant was already fallen. I guarantee it before the rock hit him. Now, that's just my opinion. You don't go down and say, like, that's in the Bible. It's not. But I know how God moves. The giant signed his death warrant the moment he stepped on the battlefield. The opposition that's in front of you, that you think is holding you back, the opposition that seems to always show up in your face, the opposition that always seems to be pushing you down or getting in your way, or what you think is not causing your life to be easy, that opposition signed its death warrant the moment it stepped in front of you. But what's going to have to happen is you are going to have to make a decision to make the connection to let God take care of it. But we want to do it on our own, don't we? We love to do it on our own. 1 Samuel 17:54. David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistines, he said to Abner, commander of the army, Abner, whose son is that young man? Pay attention right here. We're talking about opposition creates reposition. Whose son? They didn't even know who David was. They had no clue who David was. So when David showed up, why do you think his brother got angry? You see, because you imagine if they knew who he was, then when he showed up, then his brother might have started thinking jealousy, or, well, he's the one that got anointed king, or they know who he is, or they're already singing his stories, but none of this has happened. They didn't know who David was. Have you ever had God give you a dream? Or have you ever had God give you a vision? That you know God wanted to do something amazing. But you also know that it's not just because of who you are, but because of who God is, and God could use anybody. You see, what I think happened here, and I love these little stories. That's why I love these little parts, because it's what's going on. And as the brother sees David, I study human beings, and I know how we react. His brother had the same teaching. His brother had the same stories growing up. His brother was taught the exact same faith that David was taught. He had the same opportunities that David had. But in the process of David hanging out with the sheep, David was able to do something that nobody else was, and that was to create a relationship with God. To build his faith by watching the lion die. To build his faith by watching the bear die. And in that process of growing, every single time he met an opposition, David grew. Have you ever seen somebody who didn't quite equal out what they thought they would come out to? What's their first reaction? It's not joy. It's anger. If I see you doing what I know I'm supposed to be doing, if I know you're doing the right thing and I'm doing the wrong thing, I don't react by, man, you're doing awesome. I react by, well, you just don't know what you're talking about. Let's just pull up social media, right? We see this all the time on social media. Somebody's out there doing what they're supposed to do, saying what they're supposed to do, making a change, doing the right stuff, but the world wants to tear them down. Why? Because they know they should be helping them out. But if I feel belittled by your success, if I allow myself to feel, then my first response when you show up doing what you're supposed to do is, I don't like you. When it has nothing to do with you, has everything to do with what I'm really saying is I don't like what I've done with my life. See, I think sometimes we get caught up in this. And we want to lash out at people. And I think that if we're going to truly be peacemakers in this next couple of ways of what God's wanting to do in this world, we're going to have to learn that we've got to get connected with God and be okay with us. Because if we're not, we're going to lash out instead of creating peace. And I'm sure nobody in this room, including myself, has ever lashed out, right? I mean, I've been transparent. I tell you guys, I get up here and tell you, I lashed out this week. But in the process of what we're trying to do, we have got to get ourselves lined up with God's going to move, and I've got to trust him. But those two characters, we have David and we had David's brother, had one choice to make. David's brother had been there the whole time and hadn't moved yet. Because he made the choice of fear. And he made the choice of not trusting on what he learned, not trusting what he knew. And for you graduates, and this goes for everybody, as you move through life and as you move forward and what you're about to go into and you're about to go into college, and I can tell you those are some of the hardest times and some of the best times of my life. But when you move forward, you're about to have to make some choices. And when you make those choices, you're going to have to lean on what you know to be God. Because the world wants you to fail, period. But if you trust God, and in the process of trusting God, it may not look like what you think it's supposed to look like, but you will end where you think you're supposed to end. In the process of trusting God, you will be where you're supposed to be, whether you knew you were supposed to get there or not. But we have to trust God through the opposition. You see, I talked about David moving in the kingdom, but the truth is, Goliath was an opposition that repositioned David for the throne. David had already been picked to be the king. But in order for David to become king, he had to face the opposition. We've all been called to be kings. But in order for us to move into the kingdom we're supposed to be in, we had to face the opposition. Because if we're not willing to face the opposition and allow the true king to execute his power, then we fail. We don't succeed. Nehemiah 4, 1-3. So my thought process is this. With Nehemiah, I think is a great example on how to handle opposition. Nehemiah is the one who rebuilt the wall. For those of you who don't know, he's the whole chapter, the whole book's about it, Nehemiah. But it talks about how his heart was broken. He was a cupbearer for a king. His heart was broken because the walls were torn down, and that was his homeland. And he went before the king and asked for permission. He did everything right, went before the king, asked for permission to go and rebuild the walls. And so he's now rebuilding the walls of the kingdom. He's rebuilding the walls. There's many oppositions he faces, but I want to focus on one. And that's in Nehemiah 4, 1-3. And it says, when Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews. And in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore the wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was with his side, said, "What are they building? For even a fox climbing up on it would break down their walls of stones." You see, Nehemiah's got his group where they're trying to build the wall, and then here comes these two guys that are just going to start heckling them, making fun of them. Like, what do you think you're doing? You can't do that. You can't get that done. They become the voice of negativity is what I call it. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You don't know enough of the Bible to start a small group. Come on, it's the voice of negativity. It starts to tell you and slow you down and becomes opposition because you refuse to let God be God and realize that through him you can do all things. He doesn't need you to be great. He's already great. He just needs you. And so they begin to just give him a hard time and they begin to fight back. And it begins to wear down on the people. It begins to wear them down to the point to where they just want to stop working. And I love this because most people don't catch between verse 3 and verse 4, Nehemiah handles the problem. Between verse 3 and verse 4, Nehemiah does exactly what we're supposed to do when we meet our opposition. You ready? He didn't even speak to them. He turns to a higher power. And the very first thing out of his mouth as they start to bring these just trying to drive their negativity, the first thing out of his mouth is, "Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight. For they've thrown insults in the face of the builders." So we rebuilt the wall until all of it reached halfway up, and the people worked with all their heart. You see, in the process of them coming at him with opposition to stop him by trying to talk him off the wall, like, you can't do this, he doesn't even act like they're there. He just simply goes, "Hey, God, I'm going to need you to take care of that." How many times in your life have you engaged in something that you really should have just stopped and said, hey, God, see that over there? It's really causing me a problem. Can you just go fix that? Because I'm trying to do what you asked me to do. God, you put me on this wall, so I'm not coming down to even talk to them, but if you'll just take care of it, that would be fantastic. But our reaction is we go after them, don't we? We react by getting on social media and lashing out and saying what they did to us before anybody else can say, because if I can get the first word, then I'm obviously speaking the truth. Instead of doing what God tells us to do, which is, hey, the moment you meet opposition, turn to me. Turn to God. The moment you hit your opposition, you simply turn to God because God's already taken care of the opposition, and He's using that opposition to reposition you. But if you're so focused on the opposition, you're going to miss where He's trying to reposition you. If you're caught in the fight, you don't see where He's trying to take you. So we get caught. Instead, we want to take them on instead of just simply turning to God saying, God, this is your problem, not mine. And the moment we do that, we give Him permission to move. So the first thing that you've got to do, there's two things, is all you got to do to remember to handle opposition. Two things. And I'm about to wrap this up. Two things. You ready? It's so hard. One, you got to remember that when you face opposition, you're not facing that opposition for you. You're facing that opposition for God. You got to remember why you do what you do. As you guys go and you do all these amazing things and you find where you want to work and you find what you're going to do for the rest of your life, you got to remember that you're not doing that for you. You're doing that for God. He's creating a means for you to succeed and for you to be great, but in that process, He's putting you in an area to work. He doesn't just drop us off and be like, all right, go have fun and enjoy, do what you want to do the rest of your life. That's not how God works. We don't belong here anyway, so why would He want us to celebrate and live life? I'm not saying go on vacation. I love vacation. You guys know that. I'll go on vacation. But that doesn't mean we live our lives like we're on vacation all the time. He says we're supposed to put our hands on the plow and go to work. But yet sometimes we want to sit back on the couch and watch TV. Right? I got to finish my series, God. I'm going to go talk to my neighbor, but I'm going to finish this series first, and then I'll talk to my neighbor about who you are. God, I'm in the grocery store, and I know that person's hurting, and I know I can see it all over them, and I need to talk to them, but God, you know I got to get home. I got things I got to do because I want to get done so I can watch my series before it's time to go to bed. We get caught up in our own lives. We get caught up in our own scenarios. And if we're not careful, we miss out on what God put in front of us to be our wall. And the only second thing you got to do is remember that, number one, you work for God. Number two, this is the hardest thing to remember. You ready? God is awesome. You work for a God who's always working for your good. You work for a God that when you face something that looks impossible, He creates a way to make it possible. You work for a God that when you're sick, you simply have to pray and you'll be healed. Think about this. Who you're working for, who you're serving. It's not like you're stuck with something that's just terrible, but yet we walk around with our faces like this, like, yay, God. God's awesome. I'm a Christian. But man, where's this world at right now? I'm a Christian, but I just think everything is just going, it's all over. It might be. But God says I'm supposed to keep working until He gets here. I'm supposed to keep one hand on the plow and one eye on the sky. And if I'm willing to do what God called me to do, then I'm supposed to give it all I've got while I'm going. And then guess what? When you get to the end, let me just say it this way. I hate to go to work and sit still. Anybody like that? Like if I'm going to work, I want to work. That's just my personality. But I've been like that since I was a kid. Like I want to work not because necessarily the work, because it makes it go fast. Like if I'm going to go to work And I want to be super busy because now all of a sudden it's been like 4 hours and I'm like, oh, I feel like I just got here. It works the same way if we go after what God wants us to go after. As we start to push for lost souls, if we start to work for people's lives and we start to focus on what God put us here for, we stop looking at our surroundings and we're focusing on people, all of a sudden we're going to heaven faster than we thought because we think we just got here. But if we decide to just sit around and wait for it, it's going to feel like it took forever. Why not get stuff done on the way there? Why not work hard so it goes fast? In verse 14, Nehemiah stood, and after I looked things over, he says, I stood up and I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. See, y'all thought I came up with the whole God is awesome thing. You serve a great and awesome God who loves you enough to die for you, loved you enough to choose a path so that you could be connected back to Him. And in that process, He created it where we can have relationship with Him. You see, this morning I would challenge you, you have two options here. You can be like David's brother who learned everything and didn't use it. Or you can be like David, who's been trained in the Word, trained in how things work, trained in God, and choose to step out. You had to find yourself in one of those two. Everything you need to get accomplished what you've been called to accomplish is inside of you. The trick is you've got to access what's inside of you to release it out so that it can change what's around you. And so when you reach that point, as you guys move through school and you move through college, as we move forward, you got to remember you're going to face opposition. I started out talking about how everybody in here is going through something. And if we went around the room, I would imagine most of it's pretty big. It's not just something small. But allow the opposition that's in front of you to be used by God who loves you to reposition you so that you're no longer having to take care of the sheep where He's been trying to teach you, to where He can set you on the throne of what He's called you to do so now you can bring change to your area. Most Christians are great at sitting and listening. We're real good at it. Where it becomes work is we have to take what we're taught. We have a bishop that has taught us the Word, inside and out. There has been people come through this pulpit that has taught some amazing things, including some of you in this house, that have taught amazing things in Word. And we will take those things. Now we have to take it and no longer just be okay to come in on Sunday and be like, well, just feed me, I'm hungry, right? But take what you've been taught and apply it to your situation. Understand that if you're going through something, it's great to get people to pray with you, but you don't necessarily have to have Bishop to pray for you. He's taught us that. You get that handful with you, you grab hold, you believe, because that's the same power that's inside of you is the same power that's going to be praying through him when he prays for you. And you believe because God will move. And if we can reach a place where we stop trying to complain about the opposition, but start using the opposition to create a reposition. I would be amiss if I didn't talk about the eagle, because my favorite story, and I have lots of them because I'm a storyteller, and we all know how it works because we've heard it for years, is when the eagle flies and he sees a storm. As that storm is coming in, the eagle will actually use the draft of the storm to fly higher. So as that storm is moving in, the opposition that's there, And I love how Bishop, if you've not heard him teach on rising above your problems and rising above, you need to go back and find it. It's online, I promise. You need to listen to this because I love this message of his. But as you use this, that we start to move forward and see the opposition. Instead of cowering down, some of you just need to start spreading your wings out. Because what you're going to find is as you face the opposition, the eagle knows that if he can use the storm to go higher, it's less effort on him. And what he's doing, catch this, is using that opposition to get a reposition. And as he's above, he gets a different point of view. Your reposition will be a different point of view that you have, not necessarily a different place, a different area, not necessarily a different thing that's going on. You change. And when you change, you'd be amazed at all of a sudden what used to bother you doesn't bother you anymore. You'll be amazed at what used to drive you crazy you don't even notice anymore. And you'll be amazed that when those critics come at you and they start trying to tear you down with negativity, you don't even act on them anymore. Because you simply look at God and say, God, you called me this. This is your problem.